Macho Man named 5 wrestlers he actually respected, and that alone tells you how hard it was to win him over. Randy Savage was one of the most colorful stars wrestling has ever seen. He had a booming voice. He had wild outfits. He had a presence that filled the whole arena the moment he stepped through the ropes. Fans loved him from his very first match to his last. But there was another side to Savage that most fans never saw. Behind the bright colors and the loud voice was a man who did not trust easily. If Savage said he respected someone, it meant that person had done something special. It meant they had passed a test that very few people ever passed. And while we look at the rare people who earned that kind of respect, give this video some hype if you want more stories about the names who survived wrestling's wildest locker rooms. To understand why his respect mattered so much, you have to understand the man behind it. Randy Savage was guarded. He kept people at arm's length. He was paranoid about almost everything. He worried about his place on the card. He worried about getting hurt. He worried about being tricked by people he should have been able to trust. Wrestlers who worked with him said he found it hard to relax. Even on a good day, he was already thinking about the next match, planning the next move, checking every small detail before he could feel calm. He wanted to control as much as he could. He wanted to plan every step in advance. This was not always easy for the people around him. Some wrestlers did not enjoy working with Savage because of this. He could be demanding. He could be difficult. He needed things done his way, and he needed them done again and again until they felt right to him. He wanted to control as much as he could. He wanted to plan every step in advance. This was not always easy for the people around him. Some wrestlers did not enjoy working with Savage because of this. He could be demanding. He could be difficult. He needed things done his way, and he needed them done again and again until they felt right to him. This planning showed up in a very real way. Savage liked to write out his matches, almost like a script, with each move planned from the first bell to the last. Most wrestlers of his time did not work this way. They preferred to call the match on the fly, agreeing on only a few key spots, and the finish trusting their instincts once the bell rang. To them, this was a badge of honor. It showed real skill. Savage's scripted style did not always go down well with these wrestlers. One famous story involves George the Animal Steele, who was once handed a long, detailed script by Savage. Rather than read through it, Steele slowly crumpled the pages and threw them in the bin. Ric Flair, one of the biggest stars of that era, also said that Savage found it very hard to relax and that he was always worrying about how the next show would go, long before it even started. But this same trait is exactly what made his respect so rare. When Savage trusted someone, it meant that person had given him something he could not ignore. Maybe they matched his work rate. Maybe they showed him loyalty when he expected none. Maybe they walked into danger first, so he did not have to face it alone. 5 men managed to do this. 5 men broke through the wall that Savage built around himself. This video is about those 5 men and about what it took for the Macho Man to finally say, "I respect you." Number 5 is Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Savage called Steamboat one of his best friends of all time. That alone tells you how much Steamboat meant to him, because Savage did not throw words like that around. He held Steamboat in huge regard, both as a friend and as a performer. To Savage, Steamboat was not just a good wrestler. He was, in Savage's own eyes, one of the greatest baby faces the business had ever produced. This respect did not come from nowhere. It came from one match. That match was at WrestleMania 3, where Savage and Steamboat fought for the Intercontinental Championship. To this day, many fans still call it one of the greatest matches in WWE history. The story behind that match says a lot about who Savage really was. Most wrestlers in that era built their matches on the fly. They would talk backstage for a few minutes. They would agree on the big spots and the finish. Then they would go out and let their instincts guide them. This was seen as a badge of honor. It showed that a wrestler had real skill and could read a crowd in the moment. Savage did not work that way. He wanted every single move planned out from start to finish. He wanted to know exactly what was going to happen from the first bell to the last. For WrestleMania 3, Savage and Steamboat did not just talk for a few minutes backstage. They planned the match for months. They sat together in hotel rooms and worked out each sequence, piece by piece. They even tested parts of the match at smaller house shows, just to see how a real crowd would react before the big night. This was Savage's way. He could not simply trust the moment. He needed to know what was coming. He needed control over every second of the match. For many wrestlers, this kind of planning would feel like too much. It would feel like there was no room left to breathe, no room for a wrestler's own instincts to shine. Steamboat did not push back against it. Steamboat matched him step for step. Steamboat had the same drive Savage did. He wanted to steal the show just as badly. He was willing to put in the long hours. He was willing to go over the same small details again and again until they felt perfect. Steamboat later said that Savage was a very detailed worker, someone who drilled the match piece by piece, night after night, long before the cameras ever rolled. It meant long nights. It meant going over the same small movements again and again, even when most people would think the work was already finished. But Steamboat did not just survive this process. He turned it into art. The final match at WrestleMania 3 became legendary despite all that planning, but because of it. Every move flowed into the next one. Every spot landed exactly where it needed to land. Steamboat later credited that careful planning for helping make the match as great as it became. To picture what this really looked like, imagine two men sitting across from each other in a quiet hotel room, far away from the bright lights and the roaring crowds. There is no music playing. There are no fans cheering, just two wrestlers going over a notebook, talking through each movement again and again. For Savage, this was not a chore. This was the part of the job he cared about most. Most fans only ever see the finished product. They see two men flying around the ring, hitting moves that look fast and exciting. They do not see the months that came before it. They do not see the long nights, the small disagreements over timing, the moments where one man would say, "Try it again, just a little slower this time." For Savage, this process was almost like solving a puzzle. Every piece had to fit. Every movement had to lead naturally into the next, building toward a finish that would leave the crowd on their feet. He was not satisfied with a match that was simply good. He wanted something that people would remember for years. This is part of what makes Steamboat so important on this list. Many wrestlers would have found this kind of process exhausting. Some would have pushed back after the first few sessions, saying that the enough preparation had been done and it was time to just go out and wrestle. Steamboat never did this. He sat through every session. He tried every version Savage suggested, and he brought his own ideas too, till the two of them had built the match together, piece by piece, like two craftsmen working on the same project. This kind of partnership is rare in any line of work, but it is especially rare in wrestling. Personality often clash and egos can get in the way. With Steamboat, something different happened. The two of them found a rhythm together. They pushed each other, but they also trusted each other. When the match finally happened at WrestleMania 3, in front of a huge crowd, all of that hidden work paid off. Every spot landed. Steamboat did not complain about the long hours. He sat down, did the work, and helped build something that fans still talk about decades later. This is why Steamboat earned a place on Savage's short list of people he respected. He showed Savage that his demanding way of working, hard as it was on everyone involved, could lead to greatness. He accepted the system Savage built around himself, and instead of fighting it, he made it shine. Think about how many wrestlers passed through Savage's career over the years. Think about how many of them he worked with for a single night or a single feud before moving on to the next opponent. Out of all of those names, Savage chose to single out Steamboat, not just as a great opponent, but as one of his best friends of all time. For a man who kept so many people at a distance, that kind of statement carries real weight. It tells you that whatever happened in those hotel rooms, during all those long hours of planning, it created a bond that lasted well beyond the match itself. Steamboat did not just survive Savage's control, turned it into art, and Savage never forgot it. Number 4 is Andre the Giant. This next name might surprise you because the relationship between Savage and Andre was not a warm one. Andre the Giant disliked Randy Savage. This was not a secret, kept quietly backstage. Andre could be rough with wrestlers he did not like, and in the ring with Savage, he sometimes was. To understand why this matters, you have to understand who Andre was backstage. Andre acted as a kind of locker room gatekeeper. He either liked a person or he did not, and there was very little in between. If Andre did not like you, he could make your life difficult. He could be cold. He could be physical in ways that hurt. Several other big names found this out the hard way over the years. Savage was one of the people who never fully won Andre over. So here is the strange part. Even though Andre did not like him, Savage still praised Andre. In a 2004 interview, Savage said he had nothing but respect for Andre. He called him a warrior. He talked about how Andre tried to pass the torch the right way, even while dealing with terrible physical pain near the end of his career. This was a rare thing. If a man as big-hearted as Andre could be pushed to dislike someone, it says something about how difficult Savage could be to be around. Andre was known to give second chances to plenty of people. The fact that Savage never fully earned Andre's friendship, even after years in the same company, hints at just how guarded and prickly Savage's reputation could be behind the curtain. Andre's gatekeeping was not something only Savage experienced. Other wrestlers went through it too. Early in his career, Andre made life difficult for Hulk Hogan. He forced a sudden attitude change on Bam Bam Bigelow. He carried a lifelong dislike for Ivan Putski. Only a small number of people ever managed to earn Andre's respect after starting on his bad side. And one of them, interestingly, was Jake Roberts, who managed to win Andre over by standing up to him despite the intimidation. Savage was not one of the lucky few. He simply had to live with being on the wrong side of Andre's approval for good. But here is where the story turns towards something better. Savage's respect for Andre was not about friendship. It was about something deeper. It was about empathy. Think about what Andre's life was actually like. He stood at over 7 feet tall and weighed over 500 pounds. Normal beds did not fit him. Normal chairs did not hold him comfortably. Even simple things like eating utensils were not made for someone his size. Every single day of Andre's life involved struggling with a world that was not built for him. Savage saw this up close. He saw people make cruel comments about Andre in public, even in places like airports, where Andre had nowhere to hide and no way to walk away quickly. Savage watched this happen again and again, and despite everything that had happened between them in the ring, Savage respected the fact that Andre kept going. He respected that Andre stayed a dedicated professional. He respected that Andre protected the business, even while his own body was failing him. This is the heart of why Andre made the list. Savage's respect for Andre was not returned in a warm, friendly way. Andre never became Savage's friend. Savage still chose to separate the personal tension from the bigger picture. He looked past his own bruised ego and saw a man who had endured more pain, more pressure, and more public cruelty than almost anyone else in the business, and who still showed up and did his job with dignity. For someone as guarded and as quick to hold a grudge as Savage often was, this was rare. To understand how rare this was, picture the locker room culture of that era. Wrestling locker rooms were not always friendly places. They were filled with big personalities, old rivalries, and unwritten rules about respect and rank. Andre had been part of that world for a very long time, and his approval or his disapproval carried real weight. When someone as towering and as respected as Andre decided he did not like a colleague, it was not something that could be hidden. It showed in small ways. It showed in how stiff Andre's movements became in the ring, how cold his attitude was backstage. For many wrestlers, this kind of treatment from Andre felt like a verdict on their entire career. Savage was not a young rookie by the time these tensions existed, but he still had to live with the fact that one of the biggest names in the business simply did not warm to him. For a man as proud as Savage, someone who carried himself with so much confidence in interviews and in the ring, this must have stung in ways he rarely talked about openly. And yet, when Savage spoke about Andre years years later, there was no bitterness in his words. There was no attempt to settle an old score, and no comment about how difficult Andre could be to work with. Instead, Savage chose to focus on what Andre had actually been through. Think about the daily reality of being Andre's size. Every doorway was a problem. Every chair was a risk. Every flight, every hotel room, and every restaurant booth had to be managed around a body that the world simply was not built for. On top of that, Andre had to deal with people staring, pointing, and sometimes making cruel jokes, often within earshot, as if his size made him less of a person rather than more remarkable. Savage saw this. He saw it in airports, in hallways, in the small moments that most fans never think about when they picture a larger-than-life wrestling star. And rather than focusing on his own bruised feelings about their relationship, Savage chose to acknowledge what Andre had carried quietly for his entire career. This is where the negative and the positive sides of this story meet. On one hand, the fact that Andre never warmed to Savage tells us something about how Savage could come across to people, even people who were generally seen as fair. On the other hand, the fact that Savage could still look past that, speak with real respect about Andre's sacrifices, shows a side of Savage that his guardedness usually kept hidden. 3 is Kevin Nash. If the first two names made some sense, this one might raise an eyebrow. Kevin Nash was not known as a technical wrestler in the way Steamboat was. He was not known for being a gentle giant in the way Andre was. Nash was known for something very different, and Savage respected him for exactly that. During their time together in WCW, Savage praised Nash again and again. He called Nash one of the most entertaining people in the business. He said Nash had a brilliant mind. He called him funny, a good friend, and someone with a great understanding of wrestling as a whole. Savage even praised the idea behind the Wolfpack, the group Nash helped create, and compared Nash's way of thinking to that of Jake Roberts, another name on this list. To understand why this respect matters, you need to know a little about Nash's background. Before wrestling, Nash studied psychology at the University of Tennessee, while also playing basketball for the school. He started in wrestling with a string of strange early gimmicks. He was Steel, part of a tag team called the Master Blasters. He was Oz. He was Vinny Vegas. None of these worked the way the company hoped. It was only when he became Diesel that things finally clicked and his career took off. By the time Nash was working alongside Savage in WCW, he had developed a clear philosophy. People called it work smarter, harder. Nash believed in protecting his body. He believed in using his size and his mind to stay on top rather than taking unnecessary risks night after night. Old school purists hated this. To them, it looked like laziness, looked like someone who did not want to put in the work. Savage did not see it that way. Savage saw the intelligence behind it. To really understand why this respect matters, picture the wrestling business of the late 1990s. This was a time when the line between sport and business was becoming impossible to ignore. Wrestlers were not just performers anymore. They were also negotiators and decision makers. And in some cases, the people quietly shaping storylines from behind the scenes. Old school wrestlers, the ones who had grown up in a world where toughness and in-ring ability were everything, often looked down on this new way of thinking. To them, wrestlers' value came from what he could do between the ropes, from how hard he could work, and from how many bumps he could take. The idea of a wrestler protecting his body and thinking carefully about long-term value rather than short-term punishment seemed almost like cheating. Nash represented this new way of thinking more than almost anyone else. His path to success had not been simple. He had gone through gimmick after gimmick, from a face-painted powerhouse to a string of strange, one-off characters, none of which had clicked with audiences. It would have been easy for him to get lost in the shuffle, just another big man who never quite found his footing. Instead, Nash studied the business. He paid attention to who was over with the crowd, who was getting pushed, and why. It is worth remembering just how long Nash's road to success actually was. He debuted as Steel, a member of a tag team called the Master Blasters, with an orange mohawk and a powerhouse gimmick that did not connect with fans. He was rebranded soon after, then tried out as Oz, then as Vinny Vegas, neither of which found any real traction either. Each time one of these characters failed to catch on, Nash had every reason to feel discouraged. Yet each time, he kept adjusting, kept learning, kept waiting for the right opportunity. That opportunity finally came when he became Diesel. His background, with a college education that included psychology, gave him a way of thinking about people and crowds that many of his peers simply did not have. When he finally found success, and later became part of the NW, he did not just enjoy the moment. He used his new position to make smart decisions about his career. Savage, in many ways, was the perfect. Nash's planning was about something bigger, about staying valuable, staying healthy, and staying in a position of influence within the company. When the NW split happened and Nash ended up leading the Wolfpack alongside Savage, the two men were, in a sense, on the same team in more ways than one. Both of them understood that wrestling was not just about who could take the biggest bump. It was about who could last, who could stay relevant, and who could keep their name meaning something even as new stars came up around them. This is why Savage's praise of Nash feels different from his praise of Steamboat. With Nash, Savage was talking about something closer to a peer in business, someone who understood the politics, the money, and the long game in a way Savage respected on a completely different level. Number 2 is Jake the Snake Roberts. This is, by far, darkest story on this list. It is also the one that shows Savage's paranoia at its most extreme, and at the same time, shows just how far trust could go once it was finally given. In 1991, Savage and Jake Roberts were locked in one of the most intense and personal feuds in wrestling history. This was not just about who would win a match. It was about fear, danger, kind of storytelling that stuck with fans for years afterwards. The most famous moment of this feud happened on WWF Superstars. The segment was taped on the 21st of October 1991 in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and it aired a month later, 23rd of November. In this segment, Jake Roberts tied Randy Savage up in the ropes. He brought out a live king cobra and let it bite Savage's arm. Now here is where Savage's paranoia comes in fully. To understand how unusual this story is, think about how trust normally works in wrestling. Most of the time, when two wrestlers agree to a dangerous spot, they talk it through, they rehearse a safer version, and they trust each other's experience to get it right on the night. That is normally enough. When Jake first brought up the idea of using a live cobra in their feud, Savage's first reaction was not excitement about how dramatic it would look on television. His first reaction was suspicion. Why a real snake? Who had checked it? What if something went wrong? This is where Savage's paranoia becomes almost impossible to separate from his professionalism. Most performers, faced with this level of fear, might have simply refused the segment and asked for something safer. Savage did not refuse outright. Instead, he set a condition. He needed proof. To prove the snake was safe, Jake did something most people would never agree to. He sat down in the locker room and let the cobra bite him first on his own leg. Savage stood there and watched Jake for 30 minutes straight, checking for any sign that something was wrong, any sign of poison taking effect. Only after seeing that Jake was fine did Savage finally agree to go through with the segment. Picture the scene in that locker room before the cameras ever started rolling. There is no audience. There is no music. Just Jake, the snake, Savage standing nearby, watching closely in total silence. Imagine the tension in that room, not from a storyline, but from real uncertainty about whether something might go wrong right in front of him. Only when those 30 minutes passed without any problem did Savage finally feel ready to go ahead. When the moment came, Cobra latched onto Savage's arm hard. Jake struggled to get it to let go. The whole time, Jake stayed in character, smiling and nodding while the snake gnawed on Savage's arm, playing the part of the cold, heartless villain perfectly. After the segment, things got serious. Savage's arm swelled up badly. He ended up in hospital with a high fever. Different accounts give slightly different numbers, but the fever was somewhere around 103 to 104 degrees. He was treated with strong antibiotics. The cobra itself died 12 days later, which led Savage to joke afterwards that maybe he was not the one who had been de-venomized after all. This segment caused such a reaction that the company later banned Jake from bringing the Cobra to any future matches. Think about what that ban really tells us. The segment was not just shocking to fans watching at home, it was shocking enough and risky enough, people running the company decided it could never be repeated. A real animal had been used in a real physical way on live television, and the consequences had been real too, right down to Savage's hospital visit. This was not a stunt that could simply be brushed off as just another wrestling angle. It was treated as something serious enough to change the rules going forward. So why, after all of this, did Savage still respect Jake? Because Jake had proven something to him. Jake had walked into danger first. He had let the same snake bite him for asking Savage to do it. For a man as suspicious and as guarded as Savage, that kind of proof meant everything. Savage later called Jake a great student of the business. He said Jake had a great head for wrestling and that the two of them had a good run together. This story shows Savage's paranoia at its peak. He needed proof. He needed control over the situation before he could move forward. He needed to physically watch another man suffer the same risk before he could trust it himself. That is an extreme level of caution, even for someone in a dangerous business like wrestling. But it is also the clearest example of what it took to earn Savage's trust. Jake did not just talk his way into it. He did not just promise Savage it would be fine. He proved it with his own body before asking Savage to do the same. And for Savage, it was worth more than any promise ever could be. Number 1 is Bret the Hitman Hart. At the very top of this list is a man who, in many ways, represents the exact opposite of the chaos we just talked about with Jake Roberts. Where Jake's story was about danger and proof through pain, Bret Hart's story is about safety, precision, and trust without the drama. Bret Hart had a famous line that he used throughout his career. He called himself the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. This phrase actually came from a film called The Natural, but Bret made it his own. What makes this story stand out is that Savage at one point said this exact phrase back to Bret directly to his face. For a man who rarely gave out compliments, repeating someone's own words back to them as a form of praise was about as direct as Savage ever got. So what earned Bret this kind of respect? It comes down to 3 things that Bret was famous for. First, Bret never missed a booking. In a business where injuries and personal problems often cause last-minute changes, Bret was always there when he was supposed to be. Second, could produce a good match with almost any opponent, no matter their size, style, or experience level. Third, and maybe most importantly for Savage, Bret never seriously injured a colleague throughout his entire career. For a man like Savage, who spent so much of his life worried about getting hurt, worried about being set up, worried about whether the people around him could be trusted with his body, Bret represented something incredibly rare. Bret was safe. Working with Bret meant Savage did not have to worry about the things that usually kept him up at night. After everything we have covered so far, Bret might seem like the simplest entry on this list. There is no dramatic story about a live animal. There is no tale of months spent planning every detail in a hotel room. There is no story about a friendship that survived years of dislike. On the surface, Bret's story looks quiet compared to the rest, but that quietness is exactly the point. By the time Savage was working alongside Bret, he had already spent years dealing with the kind of stress that came from constantly wondering whether the people around him could be trusted. Bret's reputation did the work before Savage ever had to ask. Everyone in the business knew what Bret stood for. He was the wrestler who showed up. He was the wrestler who could work with anyone and make it look good. He was the wrestler who, after 20 years in the business, had never seriously hurt the person standing across from him in the ring. Simply knowing that Bret was on the card must have felt like a small relief for Savage. There was no need for a trust test. There was no need for months of planning to feel safe. Bret's track record was the proof, already built in, before a single bell ever rang. So there you have it. 5 men who, in their own very different ways, broke through the wall that Randy Savage kept around himself. None of these 5 men set out to impress Randy Savage. They were simply being who they were, doing their jobs the best way they knew how. But in doing so, each of them gave Savage something he could not ignore, something that cut through all of his guardedness and all of his paranoia. Steamboat matched his obsession and turned it into art. Andre showed him that dignity could survive even without warmth. Nash showed him a different kind of intelligence, one built for survival. Jake proved his trust through pain, and Bret gave him something he rarely had, the feeling of being safe. These 5 men did not just earn a few kind words from Randy Savage. They broke through the wall he kept around himself. It is something worth remembering. In the end, that might be the real lesson here. Randy Savage spent his career surrounded by noise, by color, by a character that filled every room he walked into. But underneath all of that, he was a man who measured people carefully and who gave very little away for free. 5 names in this list are not just a list of great wrestlers. They are a list of the people who, in their own way, reached past all of that noise and found the man underneath it, even if only for a moment. And for the Macho Man, being seen that clearly by even 5 people in a long career built on guarding himself from almost everyone he ever met was rare enough on its own to truly deeply matter.